Just a few days ago, Amazon dropped some more news about their planned The Lord of the Rings related series playing in the Second Age. For now it's labeled Lord of the Rings on Prime, and I promise to make an update video if there are enough news. So if you're interested in knowing what happens in the Second Age and what stories could appear, check the last video. Link is in the description or in the top right card thing. For Amazon's latest announcement, they presented us a little teaser video showing us the people behind the scenes working on the series, and some quite interesting names popped up there. Also, some weeks ago, they announced the first actress playing a role in the series, or let's say it leaked. We come to this in a moment. We will also talk a bit about potential lore, so if you don't want to know anything about the series, you should not watch the minor spoiler section at the end. I will warn you when we get there, and probably handle some of my videos like this in the future too, if it makes sense. But let me first catch up on the basic information and, in the widest sense, rumors. The professor and Tolkien scholar Tom Shippey, who is also consulting the series, gave an interview to the German Tolkien Society. He explains that the first season will have 20 episodes. That's quite a lot, and also hints, in my opinion, at a needed thorough approach. There are at least 5 seasons planned, but we don't know if all seasons will have 20 episodes. The first 2 episodes are directed by Juan Antonio Bayona, who seems competent. Of course, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, which he directed, was criticized, but for example, The Impossible was rightly praised. I think big TV shows also have some sort of buffer because they have multiple directors. Of course, we don't know yet who the other directors might be. What is good news, Professor Tom Shippey, as mentioned, is involved too, as a consultant I guess. He is a very cool guy and simply one of the best Tolkien scholars in the world. He even met Tolkien in person and also taught Old English like Tolkien in Oxford. Right now, his involvement, however, was not that big. I hope this changes over time. If you want to learn more about him, there's for example a Prancing Pony podcast episode with him as guest, which I can recommend. Also, potentially good news, the Tolkien estate, so the Tolkien family, has a veto right. So if there's something they don't like that contradicts Tolkien's writings, they can say no, which is good for fans of the books, but can also generate some conflicts in the medium film. However, Amazon is allowed to fill blank pages, and the very long Second Age has a lot of blank pages, so they are relatively free in adding characters, subplots, places and so on, which was to be expected because we only know, for example, very few characters from that age by name, most of them lords and kings. Still, Amazon must avoid contradictions to Tolkien's writings, and they must follow the outline of the lore and story Tolkien wrote. This is not a surprise, but I think it's good news that the Tolkien estate has an eye or two over everything. Shippey also explained in that interview that the First Age and the Third Age are off limits. They could explain things from the First Age if they needed it for their Second Age story, but it's hard to say to what extent. Beyond Shippey, we also got another interesting name in the trailer, John Howe for illustration and concept art. He has a long history when it comes to creating artworks showing Tolkien's world. It goes as far back as 1987, maybe further. He also worked as lead artist on Peter Jackson's trilogies with Alan Lee. So this man is more than qualified for this job, and I'm happy to see his name because he is definitely one of the great Tolkien illustrators, and you have for sure seen some of his pictures somewhere. Also an interesting name is Kate Hawley. She will be the costume designer and worked on all 3 Hobbit movies before, but there she was not a lead designer yet and was in the costume and wardrobe department. The problem of the Hobbit films were not the costumes for sure. She has done many different kinds of films lately, like Pacific Rim and Crimson Peak, so I'm not worried here. When it comes to the writers, we also see a lot of talent, like Jennifer Hutchison, who was a writer for Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, or Jason Cahill, who wrote some episodes for Sopranos and Halt and Catch Fire. After the end of Game of Thrones, some could see Brian Cogman a bit critical, but he wrote several episodes throughout multiple seasons, even for the first one. Also, he only wrote episode 2 of season 8. There was in addition news that he is only consulting for Lord of the Rings on Prime, so these are just a few examples of the writers announced so far, but I'm quite impressed. Visual effects supervisor will be Jason Smith, who was nominated for an Academy Award with The Revenant. He worked on a ton of big films like The Avengers, Transformers, and so on. Some might dislike some of the films, but he definitely knows his art. Also, production designer will be Rick Heinrichs, who won an Academy Award for Sleepy Hollow, which came out in 1999. He also worked on Star Wars Episode 8, which I personally dislike, but I have to admit it looked good. He also worked on multiple of the Pirates of the Caribbean films, for example the second one. Dead Man's Chest and Sleepy Hollow looked fantastic in my opinion, so I'm actually quite excited to see what he can do in the universe of The Lord of the Rings. Beyond that, we have the showrunners J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay and many producers. How they will influence the series is hard to say, but of course they will have an impact. I didn't know the showrunners, so I can't say much about them, but they seem a bit like a blank page too. One of the producers also has worked with Bayona several times before. Then there was a debate about if the film will be shot in Scotland or in New Zealand. The location is not officially announced, but probably depending on certain political uncertainties, it seems to be New Zealand again, which would make many fans happy, but we will see. Scotland could be a secondary location though. Then the first cast member seems to be Australian actress Michaela Kavanagh. I don't know her and she seems like a relatively new face. However, this was first reported on Variety.com, quote, according to multiple sources, and I see it more as a rumor. So the sources of Variety.com say that she plays a character called Tyra, so I would take this with a grain of salt. Her playing in the series seems likely, but the series is in such an early stage that names can probably still change. It could also be a code name and so on. Amazon puts quite some effort into secrecy of details. For example, the writer's room is guarded, and this is to my knowledge not an official announcement yet. Now we come to the minor spoiler section where I pretend that the rumor is true and speculate a bit about the name Tyra, so little spoiler warning. The name Tyra or Tyra has Old Norse origin and is still used in Scandinavia. There was a queen in Denmark from the 9th to 10th century with this name. Maybe my Danish viewers know more. And the name seems related to Thor or Thor as it would be pronounced in Old Norse. People who watched my Languages of Tolkien video know what this means. Old Norse names are, for example, common in the area around Dale and Erebor, so in the north or northeast. I also try to pronounce the names correctly. Maybe if this rumor is right, this is a hint towards this region. However, there is a huge but. In the Second Age, Dale didn't exist and the dwarves haven't even founded Erebor yet. That happens in the Third Age. The map of the Second Age was looking quite different, which shows what an ancient time of Middle-earth this is from the perspective of The Lord of the Rings. To give you an idea how much later this is, Year 1 of the Second Age is 4,440 years away from Thorin's direct ancestor Thróin the First, founding the kingdom under the mountain under Erebor the first time. There's also a time when the dwarves abandoned Erebor and return a second time. And only after this, Smaug appears and they leave it again. I really need to make a History of the Dwarves video. However, according to the History of Middle-earth book, Peoples of Middle-earth, dwarves controlled the region around Erebor and the Grey Mountains in the Second Age, and even men lived adjacent to the dwarven territories. Quote, "It was a brief period in the dark annals of the Second Age, yet for many lives of men the Longbeards controlled the Eret Mithrin, Erebor and the Iron Hills, and all the east side of the Misty Mountains as far as the confines of Lorien, while the men of the north dwelt in all the adjacent lands as far south as the Great Dwarf Road that cut through the forest. The old forest road was its ruinous remains in the Third Age, and then went northeast to the Iron Hills." So it's also possible that a character named Tyra or Tyra could be a woman of the Norsemen living in that area. This could potentially also hint at the dwarves of that region being a part of the story, which I would appreciate. Language-wise, it's a bit complicated because we don't know much about the Norsemen from that time. I can't think of any name or what language they spoke. Old Norse came probably later. Still, the Númenóreans could identify them as related to the Edain because their languages were similar. Edain are 3 or 4 ancient houses of men, it's a bit more complicated, who fled from the far east, the birthplace of men, Hildorien, to the west during the First Age. Some of the Edain became the Dún Edain, the Westmen, who lived on the island Númenor. The Númenóreans spoke originally Adunaic. Westron or common speech should evolve out of it at the end of the Second Age, early Third Age, which is represented through modern English in the books. In this context, Old Norse and other related languages are an option for the region of the Northmen, but potentially not for that time. We know from the Third Age that some of the Northmen once spoke Gothic, and then it transitioned to Anglo-Saxon or Old English with some own words. However, also Old Norse existed in the region around Dale in the Third Age, as mentioned, but Old Norse is not older than Anglo-Saxon or Gothic. So what language did they speak before in the Second Age? Maybe Proto-Norse Germanic. So how Old Norse developed out of this is not fully clear, but they probably spoke an early form of it from the North Germanic language family. Still, the name Tyra or Thyra makes sense to some degree and potentially gives us a hint that she is from this region of Middle-earth. It would also be funny if she would play a female dwarf, because dwarves often took names from other cultures around them. That's why most of the famous book dwarfs from this region also have Old Norse names. Originally, Tolkien took them out of the Poetic Edda. Still, a female dwarf outside of their halls would be extremely unusual. I also thought about the name being Elvish, but it would be very strange. The plural of Torn is Turn, and that's the only word I could think of that sounds somewhat close. The Sindari name of the Barrow Downs is Turngorthad, with Turn meaning downs, but that would be strange for an Elvish name of a person. The Old Norse connection seems more likely, so if she keeps the name, my bet is on that. A big concern or problem beyond all that could also be the timeline of the books. The Second Age is 3,441 years long. Many conflicts take quite some time, which could be hard to portray or need a massive time compression. We also saw that in The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit films. So I'm quite curious how they will solve this problem, which is huge for the medium film. I would not be surprised if we see things far more compressed. It would make no sense to change the actors of men constantly because the character died of old age during a time skip. I think finding a good balance will be quite difficult. I could also imagine that they will focus on only one of the biggest stories of the Second Age and expand on it to avoid this problem, even through multiple seasons. And with this, we are up to date, I hope. Maybe they release something while I edit or upload. If so, I will put it into the next news video. Thank you for watching. I'll plan to keep you up to date and discuss the information we get in detail, at least when I have something interesting to say. If you liked this video, please consider pressing the like button and leave a comment. If you don't want to miss next Tolkien related video, please subscribe and maybe press the annoying bell if you want to get notified when I upload a new video. If you want to see more lore content, feel free to check my channel, there's quite a lot. Next video will be again lore related. I like the idea of making something like a little beginner's guide for people new to Tolkien's works. Probably not a bad idea to have on my channel. Of course, if there are important news, I will cover them too. Again, thank you for your support, especially 1 million views on my Who is Sauron video, which is still surreal for me. I can't find a better word. And goodbye.